It began as a quiet shift, subtle at first, almost undetectable. We'd been married for a long time, and like any couple, we'd had our fair share of ups and downs. But this felt different, a quiet unease that crept into our relationship without warning. My wife, Sophia, had become distant in ways I couldn't immediately explain. There was a time when we'd talk about everything: our work, our hopes, our dreams. But lately, it was as though I was speaking to a stranger. Her responses became clipped, her gaze often drifting somewhere far beyond me. The easy laughter that once filled our home was now replaced with a suffocating silence. At first, I convinced myself it was just the stress of life. We'd moved into an old family house after the flood had swept through our previous one. It wasn't her ideal place to start anew, and I thought maybe that was the cause of her restlessness. But as the days passed, it became clear that something deeper was at play. Small changes began to show up, unnoticeable at first. Sophia would come home later than usual, claiming she had work meetings, but I never saw any evidence of them. Her phone, which had once been left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now always clutched in her hand, screen angled away from me. And there were the nights when she'd forget to wear her wedding ring, saying it didn't fit right anymore, or that she had simply rushed out without it. I tried to ignore it. After all, every marriage has its phases, right? But the more I tried to dismiss it, the more I realized that I was the only one still holding on. The turning point wasn't anything grand or dramatic. It was in the small, quiet moments. One evening, I invited her to watch a show we used to love, but she just glanced at me, her face unreadable, before murmuring, "Not tonight, I'm tired." Her eyes never left the screen of her phone. That night, I noticed her laughing, genuinely laughing, at something on her phone. It wasn't the type of laugh that came from a meme or a funny post. It was the kind of laugh that happens when you're speaking to someone who makes you feel seen. And it wasn't me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The signs were too clear to brush off. Sophia had become a shadow of the woman I once knew. She no longer seemed interested in me, in us. My attempts to reconnect felt like I was trying to communicate with someone who had already left, physically present, but emotionally gone. I started paying closer attention to the details, trying to find any clue that would explain this growing distance. I noticed how, on weekends when we used to spend time together, she'd suddenly remember plans with friends she hadn't mentioned before. It was always something vague, something I couldn't follow up on, like a brunch or a coffee with a colleague. One evening, while she was getting ready in the bedroom, I decided to sit down and ask her about it. Maybe it was the way she'd become so secretive, or the way she would check her phone incessantly, hiding it whenever I entered the room. I had to ask. I had to know what was happening, even if the truth was too hard to face. I knocked on the bedroom door, and Sophia called for me to come in. She was standing in front of the mirror, applying mascara, her back to me. She didn't even flinch as I entered, as if she had been expecting me but wasn't ready to face me. "Hey, Soph, we should talk," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. "I've been feeling like there's something between us lately. It's like you're not really here with me anymore." She paused mid-motion, mascara wand still in hand, and gave a sharp, almost dismissive sigh. Without turning around, she said, "You're being paranoid. Nothing's wrong. I'm just busy, that's all." Her tone was cold, but I didn't back down. I knew something wasn't right, and I couldn't pretend I didn't feel the distance growing between us. I've been trying to ignore it, but it's becoming harder. You're always busy, always on your phone, always disappearing for meetings that I don't even know about. And, Soph, don't think I didn't notice that you've been dressing differently too, I said, feeling the tension rise in my chest. I mean, when was the last time you wore that kind of dress? Or those shoes? Her shoulders stiffened. I watched her in the mirror, her eyes narrowing slightly. But she still didn't answer me. Instead, she turned and faced me, her expression now more annoyed than anything else. "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, "but I'm going out tonight. I don't have time for this." I stayed calm, even though my mind was racing. "Where are you going exactly? Do you want me to drop you off?" Sophia looked at me as though I had just asked her the most ridiculous question. "No," she replied sharply. "I don't need you to. I have a date, remember?" The words hit me like a slap to the face. It wasn't just the fact that she was seeing someone else. It was the utter indifference in her voice. It was as if she had already moved on and was just waiting for me to catch up. There was no remorse, no guilt in her eyes. I could feel my blood boiling, but I stayed composed. "A date," I repeated, my tone eerily calm. "I see. Well, I'm not going to make this easy for you, Sophia. If you want to be with someone else, you can go, but not under this roof. If you want to leave me for someone else, you'd better pack your things and go. I'll file for divorce once you're gone." For a moment, she just stared at me, and then she laughed. It wasn't a soft laugh either. It was bitter, filled with spite. "I'm not leaving. This house is mine too, and when we sell it, I'll make sure I get the lion's share. If you keep acting like this, I'll make sure you get nothing," she said, her words dripping with venom. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the surge of anger that threatened to explode. I wasn't about to let her manipulate me anymore. "You're making a big mistake," I said, my voice now colder. "If you want to leave, go. But if you think you're going to play these games with me, you're wrong." Sophia smirked, clearly unfazed. "I'll be back in an hour," she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "You'd better not be here when I get back. Or I'll tell everyone you threatened me. I know how this works." Sophia's words echoed in my head as I stood there, frozen in the silence that followed her departure. She thought she could control the situation. She thought I would just stand by while she walked all over me, pretending everything was fine, pretending there was nothing wrong. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't going to just let her waltz out of this house, go meet some other guy, and then come back as if nothing had changed. I knew I had to act, but I had to do it carefully. This was a game now, and she had underestimated me. As she left the house, all high heels and confidence, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of detachment. It was almost like I was watching someone else's life unfold, as though I was no longer a part of it. I didn't yell, didn't slam doors. I kept my cool, but I had a plan now. Sophia had pushed me too far, and it was time for her to realize the cost of her actions. I went out to the garage, where I had stored the baseball bat I'd used during some of our summer games, the one she always teased me about, keeping in there for nostalgia's sake. But tonight, that bat wasn't about memories. It was about sending a message. I picked it up and held it in my hands for a moment, feeling its weight. It wasn't a weapon I had any intention of using physically, but it had a purpose, just like everything else I was about to do. I went to Sophia's car. I had already prepared for her to pull this stunt, thinking she could leave and get away with it. The phone in her bag, the same one she'd been glued to for weeks, was the next thing on my mind. I removed the battery, taking my time. Her phone was her lifeline, her connection to whatever lies she was telling herself. But tonight, I was going to cut that thread. I didn't want her calling anyone, especially not the guy she was going out with. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of making a clean getaway. Then, I set to work on the little packet of condoms I had found in her bag earlier. I could have done something petty, pricked them with a needle, but I didn't. That wasn't my style. Instead, I chose to leave them untouched. Sometimes, the best way to ruin something is to leave it exactly as it is, making the other person question everything. When she returned, all dressed up in that ridiculous dress, her makeup perfect, I was sitting at the kitchen counter, sipping a cup of coffee. My demeanor hadn't changed. I was calm. I wasn't going to let her see how much her betrayal had hurt me. She stormed in, already fuming. Ra for our tation. What did you do to my car? She demanded, her voice sharp. I smiled. Why don't you go check it out? I said casually, taking another sip of my coffee. The sound of her footsteps on the hardwood floor was louder than usual, her heels clicking angrily as she headed toward the front door. It was only a matter of time before she realized what I had done. I could hear Sophia's angry footsteps as she stormed out to her car. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of my lips as I continued to sip my coffee. I had no intention of giving her the satisfaction of seeing how her actions had affected me. No, tonight wasn't about emotion. It was about control. It was about showing her who was really in charge of this house. The sound of her angry shouting reached me through the window, the words unintelligible at first, but growing louder with Inyamasi Sinet. I waited, letting the silence build in the house, as though the calm before the storm was the only thing that mattered now. Moments later, the door slammed open, and Sophia marched back into the house, her face red with fury. What did you do to my car? She demanded again, her eyes wide with rage. I looked at her, pretending to consider the question for a moment. What do you mean? I said, my voice steady, even. It's parked in the driveway. What could have happened? She glared at me, her face twisting in disbelief. You know exactly what happened. You did something to my car. The phone doesn't work. My keys are all messed up. What the hell did you do? I raised an eyebrow, taking another slow sip from my coffee, feeling the weight of my next words. You really think I'd leave something that obvious, Sophia? Maybe you should have kept better control of your things. Maybe then you wouldn't be so surprised by a little inconvenience. Her fury was palpable. I could see her entire world unraveling before her. The self-assurance she had shown earlier in the night was gone. Now, all she had was confusion and anger, and the realization that she no longer had the upper hand. She wasn't in control anymore. She began. But before she could say anything further, the sound of a loud engine broke the silence. She turned sharply toward the window, her face draining of color, as the car outside roared to life. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice suddenly quieter. I could see her processing everything, the fear creeping in as she made the connection. "It's just my car, Sophia," I said with a calm smile. "Nothing special." She turned back to me, clearly not buying it. "Why is it even in the driveway? You're not planning to drive off too, are you? You better not be trying to stop me from leaving." "Go ahead," I said, finally standing up and putting the cup down. "But when you're done, don't expect me to be here waiting for you. You've already made your choice." Sophia hesitated, her frustration turning into something else. She could feel it now. The weight of everything she'd done had shifted. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was her reality crumbling around her. She had no more excuses, no more room to manipulate or control the situation. Her eyes flickered toward the garage as she stormed back outside, muttering under her breath. I didn't move from my place, watching her every step. I could see the desperation in her walk now, the hurried pace, the clenched jaw. She was unraveling, and I wasn't going to stop it. Sophia was frantic now. I could see her every movement, every panicked glance towards the driveway, as she stormed back and forth between the front door and the garage. The irritation that had once been a shield around her was cracking, revealing something else: guilt, fear, and the realization that she no longer controlled this situation. I knew exactly what she was thinking. She was probably trying to figure out how to salvage the night, how to make it all go away. She hadn't counted on me standing my ground. Not on this level. As I watched her struggle, I couldn't help but think that she had truly underestimated me. I didn't have to follow her. She would make the mistake on her own, and when she did, I would be ready. It was a game of patience now. Minutes passed, and I heard her slam the door to the garage, her heels clacking as she walked in. The next sound that reached me made my heart skip a beat: the deafening roar of the engine as she tried to start the truck. It was almost like she was trying to force the car to move, not realizing that I had already disconnected the garage door opener. I knew what was coming next. Her stubbornness was both her strength and her weakness. She wasn't going to give up easily. She revved the engine again, her foot pressing the gas with more force, clearly thinking I'd left the door unlocked, or that it was just some fluke. But nothing happened. The silence that followed was brief, and then crash. The sound was like a slap to reality. Sophia's car slammed into the garage door with such force that it felt like the house itself shook. I didn't flinch, didn't even move from my spot in the kitchen. Instead, I stood still, listening to the wreckage unfold outside. I had anticipated this, and yet seeing it happen was almost surreal. The power of the impact, the screeching of metal on metal, and then the almost eerie silence that followed. Sophia came rushing back inside, her face a mix of shock and fury. "You've got to be kidding me!" she shouted, her voice shaking. "What the hell did you do to my car?" I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. Her rage was now fully unleashed, and she was looking for someone to blame. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. "Maybe you should have been a little more careful," I said, my voice icy. You were in such a rush, weren't you? You didn't even check to see that I'd already taken precautions. She stood there, stunned for a moment, as if the reality of what had just happened hadn't fully hit her. But when she finally registered the situation, her anger returned, stronger than ever. She marched to her purse, grabbing her phone, her hands shaking with frustration. "Great, now I can't even reach him!" she screamed, waving the useless phone in the air. "You broke it! You ruined everything!" I watched her in silence, knowing the next steps were inevitable. She would try to get help. She would try to call someone, anyone. But by now, it was too late. I had already taken the power from her, and there was no getting it back. She stormed out again, this time with a determination that came from desperation. I knew she was probably thinking of going to a neighbor's house, maybe even calling the police, like she'd threatened earlier. I let her go. I let her think she could still control something, still hold on to whatever shred of dignity she had left. The air was thick with tension, each passing moment stretching the reality of what was unfolding. I watched from the window as Sophia's attempts to salvage her night grew more desperate. She went from neighbor to neighbor, knocking on doors, her heels clicking loudly against the pavement. But no one opened the door. I could hear her growing more agitated, her voice rising with every failed attempt to find help. Eventually, she returned to the house, her face flushed with frustration and embarrassment, but she didn't come in through the front door. Instead, I saw her walk toward the side of the house, heading for the garage where the damage had been done. I knew exactly what she was thinking. She probably thought I had left, or that I had made my own escape. But I hadn't moved an inch. I took my time, walking to the door. I knew the confrontation was coming, and I was ready. She needed to face the reality of her actions, just like I had faced the reality of living with someone who had no regard for the commitment we once shared. The moment I stepped outside, she turned toward me. Her face, still streaked with the remnants of her makeup, was twisted with anger. She was furious. No, she was beyond furious. It was like a wild animal, trapped and desperate, clawing its way through the last of its pride. "You've ruined everything," she spat, her voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You think you've won? You think I'll just stand here and let you get away with this?" I stood there, calm and unyielding. "I didn't ruin anything. You did that all on your own, Sophia. You made your choices. And now you're facing the consequences. You thought you could do whatever you wanted, but not anymore." She took a step toward me, her hands shaking. But I didn't back down. I had already made my peace with the situation. Her attempts to manipulate me, to twist the truth and paint herself as the victim, meant nothing now. I wasn't playing her game anymore. "Call the cops. Call whoever you want. The truth is, it's over. You don't get to control me anymore." I paused, letting that sink in. This isn't about you and me anymore. It's about me walking away from all of this. The lies, the manipulation, the deceit. I'm done. Her expression faltered for just a moment. I could see the realization hitting her. This time, there was no running away from the truth. She wasn't going to get away with it, and she wasn't going to manipulate me any longer. Sophia's anger had no place to go now. She stared at me, speechless for a moment, before she turned and walked back to her car, not bothering to look back. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had been prepared for this moment, ready to confront the truth, and now I was ready to close the door on this chapter of my life. The following weeks were a blur. Sophia had left, taking only the things she couldn't live without. The divorce proceedings went smoothly. I had already made my decision. The damage she had done was irreversible, but I wasn't going to let her take any more from me. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. The house, which had once been filled with chaos and lies, was now quiet and peaceful. I reconnected with old friends, started new hobbies, and learned to enjoy the simple pleasures of life again. A few months later, I met someone. Her name was Lily, and she was everything Sophia hadn't been. Honest, kind, and loving, in a way that made me believe in second chances. Our relationship wasn't rushed. It was built on mutual respect, something I had lost in my first marriage. The day I signed the final papers of the divorce, I realized that life doesn't always go as planned. But sometimes, the unexpected turns are what lead you to where you're truly meant to be. And as I walked out of the courthouse with Lily by my side, I knew I had done the right thing. The pain from my past no longer had a hold on me. It was over. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe again. Dear audience, share your views in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.